Hi, this is Meghna. I just wanted to say that before you guys continue on to watch the video, this video does contain mentions of a particular scene in the book where a character is sexually assaulted. Just wanted to put a quick disclaimer about that before the video started. Hi, I'm Meghna.
I'm Sahana,
And this is Shankari,
our co-host and co-producer. Today we're going to be discussing the book Crime and Punishment by Fyodor Dostoevsky.
Okay, so to give a brief synopsis of this book, it revolves around a main character named Raskolnikov who has just committed a crime and is struggling to conceal it. He deals with the guilt and mental torture of concealing the crime along with lying to his loved ones, friends, and family. And the book deals with his deep introspection into dealing with this, and at the end ends with him finally accepting that he must confess to the crime and deal with the punishment set by law.
Yeah, some of the strongest points of these books are the introspection that Meghna mentioned. We really got to see Raskolnikov's mind and how he's dealing with the consequences of his crime. Another big point is the way that suspense and tension are built throughout the book. Although you know who the killer is already, if we're looking at this in the setting of a detective novel, although we already know who the killer is, Dostoevsky still manages to weave this brilliant tension throughout everything. Will he be caught? Will he not be caught? What is going to happen next? So those are definitely some of the strongest points of this book. There's also a very good characterization, very complex characterization that really gets you attached or interested in the characters in this book, even if you know that they're bad people, right? So the crime before we get started, first of all, this is a Russian novel, which means that every character has at least 16 different names. Because, so we'll try not to use as many names for as many characters as possible. We'll try to stick to calling them just one name. But for the main character, he can be called Raskolnikov or Rodia interchangeably. So we're just letting you know that before we get started. Anyways, there's very complex characterization in this book, and we see many characters serve as foils to Raskolnikov, right? Many characters who are similar to him in some ways, but they are different to him in ways that make them contrast Raskolnikov's own characteristics. So one of the characters that does this is Dunya, who is Raskolnikov's sister.
Yeah, so talking more about Dunya, right? Dunya was one of my favorite characters in this book because she is so mentally strong and sound and doesn't sway for pretty much anything. She is incredibly grounded in her beliefs, which is a huge contrast to her brother, Raskolnikov, who seems to shake and struggle at every decision. As soon as he kills the pawnbroker and the pawnbroker's relation. As soon as he commits this murder and he comes back home, in his head he's already gaslighting himself, trying to rationalize it and panicking over the fact that he just killed them. He's experiencing tenfold different emotions, and he is bedridden, unable to move, and depends on his friend to feed him and take care of him. Dunya is in a similar financial situation to Raskolnikov. Both of them are pretty much very poor, but she's poor like Raskolnikov, and yet she has a mental capacity in order to say, here's where I am, what do I do next? That kind of grounded personality is a deep contrast to who Raskolnikov is. More further than this, Raskolnikov ends up committing the murder. Why? We don't really see why until way later in the book, where he has this kind of principled notion as to why he commits a murder. We'll talk about this later. But Dunya is trapped in a room with this guy named Svidrigailov. Svidrigailov tried to make moves on Dunya before and end up dishonoring her name and causing a lot of harm upon her. However, when trapped in a room with him, he does try to rape her and he tries to sexually assault her. And she has access to a gun, and while all of us as the reader are saying, shoot him, shoot him, shoot him, she is unable to, she makes a choice actually, she willingly makes a choice not to shoot him, not to save him, not to protect him from anything, but rather because she realizes what will this do to myself? I will have to serve the punishment for this crime, and then leaves. And that kind of mental strength, I guess, nobody would blame her if she decided to shoot the guy in the room.
Arguably, she's much more justified than Raskolnikov in committing the crime of killing somebody. If you're gonna kill somebody, kill them for raping you, not because of your own moral ideas, right? And no fault of the other person. But she shoots him. She does not shoot him, and that decision is so key in the development of her character, because her mom and Raskolnikov's mom, she herself says that both Dunya and Rodia are very similar people, right? They have similar characters, but it's these very key decisions that differentiate the both of them. Another factor which I think fed into this is just the environments they were in, because Rodya, he chose to isolate himself. There are chances he has to have friendship, but he chooses to stay by himself. And his isolation, I believe, drives his insanity. On the other hand, Danya always had her mother, and even though she was deemed a pariah by the people around her, her mother was always on her side. So I believe that no matter how much or how little support her mother offered her, it was the fact that there was somebody else next to her throughout all of this. Of course, a lot of it can be attributed to the character's innate strengths and personalities, but I do believe setting did serve a role in this scenario.
Yeah, it did. I also think that there's always this thing in the novel. You can see a very key point where Danya and her mother are always trying to support Rodya. They're trying to, every decision they make is almost geared towards helping him, getting him out of his current situation, right? The whole reason why Danya agrees to marry this strange guy named Lucian is so that Lucian can help her brother out and get him into his business, right? She sends over money to her brother knowing that he'll need it, knowing that he'll need it for his education. She has this kind of selfless streak, whereas Raskolnikov is kind of selfish. A lot of the things that he does is for himself and himself only, where Danya, she kind of thinks about the others around her and tries to put others first.
Yeah. That brings us to the second point of this book, which is there are other characters. Raskolnikov is not the only bad guy in this book. There's other characters such as Svidrigailov and Lucian. So Lucian is basically Danya's scumbag fiance. He has the most annoying character out of a lot of the characters in the book, and so a lot of the characters in the book hate him because they realize that the reason Lucian wants to marry Danya is because he has his own delusions about saving somebody from poverty and making them completely dependent on him. He has a really weird complex. And then Svidrigailov, he completely ruined Danya's reputation, and he just takes life like it's a game. He hurts people like it's nothing just because he finds it entertaining. And also he has a weird hyperfixation on young girls, which is very strange.
Yeah, so and not to mention, he did try to sexually assault Danya in a locked room.
So these characters are arguably really bad. And then Raskolnikov is also a bad character in some senses because he committed a murder, which is obviously something really horrible. But for some reason, we believe in Raskolnikov's redemption, but not Svidrigailov's or Lucian. I think the reason for this kind of brings us to our second point, which is that Raskolnikov feels a lot of guilt for the actions he's committed. He himself denies that he feels guilt because he has these ideas where he's a great person, great people like Napoleon or whatever. They have committed many murders, they have committed many horrible acts, but we forgive them for it because great people do not have to follow the same laws as ordinary people. And I thought he wanted to distinguish himself as a great person, which is part of the reason he committed the murder, right? But even though he tries to deny it the entire time, he's I'm not guilty of this at all. I'm rationalizing my crime, whatever. He is bedridden by guilt. He is constantly plagued by his guilt. And that guilt gives us hope for his redemption because we're okay, he's not like Lucian. He's not like Svidrigailov. He's not shameless about his crimes. He feels this deep sense of guilt, which gives you this hope. And the second point is that he does have acts of selflessness. At some point in time, he saves this, there's this guy who's really hard on his luck. His name is Marmalado, and he helps this guy out. He gives this guy a lot of money. He helps his family out with their funeral in these brief acts of selflessness. And he himself cannot rationalize why he committed these actions. He so badly wants to think of himself as this calculating, ruthless person, this person who's above all else. But he is so painfully human, you know?
Exactly. So more on this point about reaching greatness, even if you cannot forgive Svidrigailov because of his unforgivable actions, with Lucian never committed an actual crime. Even though he is disgusting towards Danya and her family and to Raskolnikov murdered somebody, whereas Lucian didn't. And we're still able to sympathize with Raskolnikov more than we do with Lucian because Lucian, like Sahana says, is irredeemable. Raskolnikov, as Sahana said before, he does want to achieve his greatness. He wants to fill out this philosophy where the ends matter so much more than the means, but is unable to do so. And to him, humanity is a weakness, but to the reader, it is a strength. And if we look further in this, there's this one quote where I remember reading somewhere. Ruthlessness is about seeing the bright light in front of ruthlessness isn't about blood or bloodshed. It's about seeing the bright light in front of you and just walking straight to it no matter what kind of red is on the floor, right? But Raskolnikov is unable to do this. He cannot achieve this huge great emperor-like status that he desperately wants to fill out. He cannot become society's Superman or a vigilante that just kills people just to, in his words, his killing of the pawnbroker was justified because she wasn't contributing anything to society. In fact, she was really, really mean to a lot of people, basically putting them into financial poverty, kind of destroying the lives of so many around her. And while he tries to rationalize her murder in his head, he's unable to do so because he still has that hope of humanity inside of him. And though he sees it as a weakness, it really isn't.
Yeah, and that brings us to one of the biggest themes of this novel, which is redemption through guilt. So if you notice this idea, it's a fundamentally Christian idea in some senses that, like, through your guilt, you can gain, like, a new life. Like, your sins will be absolved, right? Like, there's that huge idea, and that also leads into, like, another parable, which was just, like, pulled throughout this book through everywhere, and it was, like, the parable of Lazarus. Like,
yes,
Lazarus.
Yeah. So in part of, like, Christian, like, faith, right? There's this story of Lazarus and how Lazarus was basically re-given life by Jesus Christ. Like, Jesus was able to make people believe because Lazarus was so devoted to Jesus that when he died, Jesus kind of brought him back to life, like a rebirth, like a miracle. And how do we hear about the story of Lazarus? Well, we hear about the story when in the book, Raskolnikov goes and meets Sonia. Sonia is Marmeladov's daughter, and she essentially, like, is forced to prostitute herself in order to provide her family with earnings and, like, support her family, right? And Sonia is very devoted to God, and she kind of sees the Bible as, like, refuge. Why does Rodia go to her? Because in his eyes, he kind of, like, out of his own selfish nature, he wants to bring Sonia down to his level. He's like, she prostitutes herself, I commit murder. Like, it's basically the same thing. Like, we're basically in the same state of life. Like, I can go talk to her about anything because she's like me. But fundamentally, the motives for both of these things are different. While Rodia wants to do his murder to become societal Superman, Sonia does her crime in order to support her family because they are so destitute. And Sonia repents very deeply, and she has accepted repenting, right? And so when Rodia goes to meet her, he asks her to read from, like, the Testament, and he asks her to read the story of Lazarus. And I think that reading is one of the most beautiful parts of that book because you can hear, like, the emotion in Sonia's voice as she's reading it, because both of these people desperately wish for a miracle to save them. Both of them desperately wish for rebirth, whether they acknowledge it or not.
Yeah, and in some senses, Rodia is parallel to be Lazarus, while Sonia is parallel to be Jesus, right?
Yeah.
And she sort of brings him back to life. In the epilogue of the novel, Raskolnikov, because he's so plagued by his guilt, and because he so badly wants redemption, Sonia literally tells him to go confess. And he's driven to the point where he does just that. He confesses his crime, he ends up getting punished with 10 years in jail, right? 3 years into his sentence, Sonia comes to visit him because she's the only person who visits him every day because his family has moved to a different area, and he finds refuge in her, and he finds refuge in Christianity. And some people think that this kind of came out of nowhere, but I don't think it did, because those ideas of guilt and reclamation through guilt and, like, just giving up your sins to a greater power, that theme was always there throughout the book.
Yeah, I think that rather than looking at as religion as, like, he finally accepted Christianity, we can admit in the epilogue what he kind of gains instead is this connection to other people. Because I remember you talking about this, the entire book, he's been isolating himself from the people around him. Danya and his mother both care about him so much. And his friend Razumikin feeds him food. He takes care of him. He blankets him in bed. He makes sure that he sleeps. He offers him a job. Like, this guy loves him so much. And when we look at Sonia is, like, there like a dog every single day at the jail cell, right? She's like always there for him, you know? And whether he admits it or not, he has grown fond of her. And he is fond of these people in his life. That isolation of a guy from society, this idea that I can rise to this greater power by cutting off everyone around me. The author does such an amazing job showing how it's just not physically human to do that.
Yeah.
How it causes you so much torture and an eternal pain to cut off everyone around you. And at the end of the day, when he asks Sonia, please read from the Testament to me, it's kind of not like, I feel like though it could be seen as like accepting Christianity, it's more of just like accepting human connection again. And like kind of like, I extend a hand to you, please take it.
Yeah, okay. And then I really out this book earlier because I said the redemption was through his guilt, and I was incorrect through that because the crime was his murder. The punishment was his guilt, and that punishment led to his redemption. The guilt led him to his redemption, and that true redemption was the love that the people around him had for him. It was Sonia's love for him. It was his mother's love for him. It was his sister's love for him. It was Rashmikin's love for him. And it was his love for them that was truly his redemption. That was the only way he was able to really escape, right?
Exactly. I think that instead of looking at like the story through a lens of rebirth, we should look at it through a lens of more of like reconstruction. Because basically, in my eyes, like Raskolnikov Raja, he's basically fragmented himself into all of these different pieces. Throughout like the book, when he's introspecting, his mind is so divided. He's like, I have to confess to the crime. No, I can't confess to the crime. No, I did it because I did it for society. I did it for the greater good, and I have to accept that. No, I have this guilty complex, like even though I can't admit it. Like he is plagued by all these different pieces of himself. You kind of hear him breaking apart and pushing everyone away from him. So this reconstruction in that he has to build himself back up again. He has to put these pieces of himself back up again. That's what the author leaves us with. And the way the author leaves us at the end of the book, he kind of ends it with that, all right, this is the crime and this is the punishment. What comes next will be another novel. It'll be another story.
Yeah.
And so then that's kind of the rebirth we see there. And back to this idea of like the punishment isn't really a material thing. The punishment, like Zahana mentioned earlier,
it wasn't in the end. The prison wasn't his punishment. He mentions the prison was so much like his life before because he lived such a horrible life.
Yeah.
The prison isn't his punishment. His guilt, his conscience, he himself is his punishment because his humanity punishes him for the evil he's done.
Exactly. So like literally when he's in prison, he just talks about it like he's living his regular life. Like it's Siberia, but he's like, oh yeah, I just like eat and sleep and like whatever. But like the author is trying to tell us, like when we look at the Russian word for punishment, it means to step over, right? And so that theme of like stepping over can be seen throughout the entire book. We see Raskolnikov trying to step over a certain crime, right? He's trying to step over a certain crime in order to kind of achieve that image of Napoleon, but is unable to, right? He's unable to do that and has to, and that punishment is just him putting himself through several degrees of mental torture and just ripping himself apart. And it takes a toll on his, not just his mental health, but his physical health. He becomes so weak and isolated that he's just unable to do anything. And while he tries to run away from his fate and agree that he can live a normal life, he's just not able to do that. And with this introduction of like Svidrigailov and Luzhin into the novel, we further see how Raskolnikov is so heavily different from them, because the way he is able to feel that guilt sets him apart from these people who are truly irredeemable.
Yeah. So there's this complex characterization, there's these incredible plot lines, and there's the way that redemption and evil and punishment are all discussed and are all intertwined together in this novel that makes it just such a brilliant novel. Like Dostoevsky truly cooked here. Like you cannot say that he did. So definitely read this. Definitely give this a read. It is a classic piece of literature. It has so much meaning and so much value, and it still reflects true in our current world, even though it was written a while ago. So highly recommend reading this book, and thank you so much for watching.
Thank you for watching. We'll see you next time.
Bye.
Bye.